Okay, so we'll move back to the agenda as it is on your papers. So item 9, appointment of working parties and subcommittees, which is on page 23 to 26 of your agenda papers. And I think Elizabeth is going to present this for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. As we are moving towards a unitary council, there has been considerable discussion between group leaders as to whether we keep bringing reports back to committees when we have resignations. And as you know, in the past, we've had quite a few resignations. The collective agreement of group leaders is that we shouldn't keep wasting time doing this. However, we have one last appointment process to undertake. On your desks, you will find appointment subcommittees, which was updated on the 3rd of November. Please accept my apologies that this hasn't come out to you earlier. It was to follow on the agenda. So in essence, there's not very much to change other than a proposal that Councillor Docra will become a substantive member of the Grants Working Party. And that Councillor Docra will take Councillor Keen's place as substitute on the Flood Management Working Party. Councillor Duncan and the Conservative Group are happy that their vacant place on Livestock Market Working Party remain unfilled, as is their vacant place on the Local Plan Working Party. Councillor Potter is going to become the substitute on the Grants Working Party. So those are the only changes that we are proposing. It is very unlikely that we will be availing ourselves of any meetings of the Grants Working Party or the Appointments Subcommittee. However, I would just recommend that we just leave as is for the duration of time that we have as Rydale District Council. So if you are happy with those recommendations that have been agreed by the group leaders, I'd be grateful if you could have a decision and a vote as to whether we can move ahead on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that explanation. Do members have this paper? Yeah, sorry, I thought Nikki was looking around to see if we'd got this or not. So, okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Elizabeth? I think I can predict what your question is, Councillor Duncan.
I'm happy with the membership that's been laid out, and I did communicate that prior to the meeting, so there's no problems on that front. My question really was just that around the Grants Working Party, we approve after every annual meeting of council, the first meeting of P&R, we approve the terms of reference for each of the subcommittees at the working parties. We agreed a terms of reference for the Grants Working Party, which I've just appointed Councillor Docra, well, I've recommended to the committee to make her a substantive member of that working party. Obviously, I've heard from Elizabeth that there's unlikely to be a meeting of the Grants Working Party, but I've also heard that the Grants Working Party is going to be the body that is going to consider SIL applications. Therefore, my question is that if the Grants Working Party remit has changed, my view is that the terms of reference should be changed by this committee to reflect its changed remit. There was a recommendation that was approved at council for the Grants Working Party to then consider the SIL applications. However, that's not reflected in their terms of reference. And I think we just need to be clear as to if it is this body, is it the Grants Working Party or is it something different? Is it just happening to be the same people? I think we just need to tighten that up a little bit because it's not quite clear to me in terms of a sort of governance point of view what their role is going to be.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Yes, you are quite right, and that is a good point that you have raised. In terms of the SIL and the applications, we are still in discussion with North Yorkshire County Council on that matter as to how we move forward. And once we have come to a final decision, then if it is going to be the case that we are going to make allocations of SIL via our Grants Working Party, then yes, indeed, we will have to update the terms of reference. They haven't been updated as yet because obviously we are still in discussion with the County Council on this. But once a definitive decision is made, then yes, we may well have to update the terms of reference because they would not be adequate as they currently are if we are going to use this as a vehicle for our SIL. So it is something that we are very mindful of and something that will be done if we need to do it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So just to
Sorry,
follow up,
Councillor Duncan again.
thank you, Elizabeth, for that. Just to follow up, at the moment, the Grants Working Party, I think they have a budget of, I think it has been 25, it has been £50,000 a year, and they make recommendations to us here at P&R to give consent to spending £50,000 annually. The proposal from full council is that for the £3 million pot of SIL, the Grants Working Party would not be making recommendations to P&R, which it does for £50,000 in total. It will be making recommendations directly to the chair of P&R only, consultation with relevant officers. And clearly there's a bit of a mismatch again in terms of governance, that if we're applying such stringent measures to £50,000, we're not applying those to potentially £3 million in total. So I do think we need to really round that off. I am aware that there is an opinion, whether it's right or wrong, that any expenditure of SIL would need Section 24 consent. But I think it's right that we make sure internally as Rydal District Council, we're applying the same stringent measures we would to relatively small amounts of grant funding, several £1,000s per organisation, that we're applying the same measures to 100, 200, 300 plus hundreds, thousands of pounds. So I think we just need to be really careful on that front. So I think just need to give consideration to that.
Absolutely, and I can assure the committee that yes, that will be done. So you have raised some very important points, very relevant points, and depending on the outcome of our negotiations and discussions with North Yorkshire County Council, the relevant amendments we've made and the safeguarding will be put in place that covers that.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Councillor Paul Andrews.
Just checking, Elizabeth, have all the group leaders agreed this list?
Yes, it's been to all group leaders. Yes, we've have had responses. Yes.
Further questions for Elizabeth? Okay. So we don't have any nominations this evening for any of those vacancies. Just thought we need to check, Elizabeth, just to be on the safe side if anybody's brought them to the meeting. But
No, other than what I have described and the vacancies that are going to remain, no, that is as agreed with the group leaders. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Duncan.
I won't labour this point too much, but as we know, while working parties don't have to be politically proportional, subcommittees do. Given I've lost a number of my members from the Conservative group, got less people than I had before. I'm not quite sure that the proportionality of the appointment subcommittee is quite correct. Having said that, I think it's unlikely that the appointment subcommittee would be called on to meet. So it's maybe a moot point, but I just wanted to raise that point here, that if there are subcommittees at any point here or under overview and scrutiny, the subcommittee should be politically proportional as well.
Yes.
That's probably not right, just on the basis.
No, you're quite right, it's not, and it was a matter that was raised with the group leaders in a meeting some time ago when we started to look at this. So in the event that the subcommittees have to be convened, and obviously I agree with you, it's very unlikely, but in the event they do, then proportionality will apply. Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I would think probably at this late stage we won't need convene that subcommittee, all those two subcommittees. So thank you. Okay, do we have any further questions for Elizabeth? If not, I will propose the recommendation from the chair. Were you seconding, Councillor Andrew? Thank you. So the recommendation is on page 23, that the members and substitutes be appointed to the vacancies on the working parties and subcommittees of the Policy and Resources Committee as shown in Appendix 1, which you have in front of you. All those in favour, please show.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, members. Moving on to item 10, the review of the council's procedures for waste collection from holiday lets on pages 27 to 44 of your agenda. And I believe Becky's presenting this this report, and I am aware that you'd like to speak on this at some point, Councillor Thackeray. So we'll remember to, but if I forget to bring you in, please wave at me. I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. This report is a referral from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which took place on the 28th of September, following a review of the council's procedures for waste collection from holiday lets. The history behind this review goes back to June, when the issue of the waste collection arrangements from holiday lets was raised by Councillor Thackeray and discussed at Overview and Scrutiny, and it was agreed that review of this area would be undertaken. And the purpose of the review was to ensure that the council receives income due from holiday lets operating as a business, or where there is no commercial waste contract in place with council, then appropriate actions taken to stop the waste collection from these properties. Pre-COVID, an annual exercise was undertaken by Waste Services to review a report that we received from the business rates system to ensure that we could check that the waste collection arrangements were in place for holiday lets. During COVID, this exercise didn't take place because there was lack of capacity, and the work that occurred as a result of COVID, the lockdown periods and adjustments to accounts and the work that the business rates teams were doing, there just wasn't the capacity to undertake that piece of work. And what we discovered was that during that period, there was a significant increase in the number of holiday lets in the district, nearly 40% increase in the numbers compared to pre-COVID numbers. So in June, when we undertook the review, the baseline position of holiday lets in Rydal was 553 properties, with 189 of those properties actually having a contract with the council. The exercise that we then undertook was to write to all the properties who didn't have a contract with the council to ensure they understood what their responsibilities are as a holiday let owner, and for them to let us know what their requirement was for the waste collection. One outcome from the exercise was the identification of properties that already actually had a contract with the council. And the reason that we didn't know about that is the way that different departments or different systems the council has classifies properties in different ways. So we actually had contracts in place for, an example would be farms, where farms had actually converted buildings into holiday lets. We had a contract with the farmer and that actually covered the holiday lets. So the baseline position we found ourselves in at the start of the, once we discovered that, was that we had 46% of the properties actually had a contract with the council. And then we took on new contracts, 162 new contracts, and at the 1st of September, the council had 75% of the holiday lets had a contract with our service. The income that's generated from that extra contract, the extra contracts in this financial year is £26,000. And on the basis that those contracts continue into a future financial year, the annual income is in the region of £39,000. During the review, a number of improvements have been implemented to ensure we have a robust management of waste collections from holiday lets, including information on our in-cab technology that's in the vehicles. And we also now receive a monthly report from business rates, so we can track in year any movements, either additional properties coming on as business rated or properties coming off, so we can manage this very specific group of properties on an ongoing basis. The budget this year actually did include a one-off cost for an enforcement officer to support the work of the Waste and Environmental Services team. However, for us to be effective around enforcement, one of the recommendations is to seek approval to use some of the extra income generated to actually fund this post on an ongoing basis. And the recommendations in the report were supported unanimously by Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Therefore, the recommendations are to seek approval from Policy and Resources Committee, given there are ongoing budget implications. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Becky. Have any questions for Becky? Yes, I haven't forgotten Councillor Thackeray. Just was checking with members first.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Thackeray.
Yeah. A few little questions. They're only fairly small questions. I asked for printout of a tariff of the charges that Rydale District Council levies on holiday lets. The reason why I would like this and I'd like members to see it is because I would also like a small amount of research to be done to compare the charges levied by Rydale District Council with other commercial waste collectors operating in Rydale, so that we are competitive and that we're not, obviously we're not going to be overcharging people, but neither, in my opinion, should we be undercharging them either. One item, one word or sentence in the report 6.51 refers to a more discreet sticker for the bins. I'm not sure whether that's a typing error, because I would have thought for the benefit of everybody checking on holiday cottages that a less discreet sticker would be more appropriate. And the final point, really, final question is this. Information on the Rydale District Council business rates, commercial, whatever it is, holiday lets and hotels and caravan sites and everything website. There's 600, well, at the date that it was sent to me, there's 694 holiday businesses. It also lists the date at which they were registered on the Rydale District Council system, some of which going back a lot of years. I would like to know if this council is going to pursue the back payments or non-payments of council tax business rates for those people who have dodged the system for a lot of years. Because I would imagine that there is a huge amount of money lurking out there that belongs to the taxpayers of Rydale.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank you.
Thackeray.
That was it.
Yeah, you did ask for the prices of the waste collection service, both from Rydale District Council, but also for external operators. And having taken advice on that, it was felt that we couldn't present those to council because it is commercially sensitive. When it's external operators, it is commercially sensitive information.
No, I just said, sorry, just let's clarify what I'm asking for. When you send a tariff to a customer, you send a tariff. We are being told that we're not entitled to see that tariff. So you expect Councillor Thackeray to ring up holiday let companies, businesses, people, knock on doors and say, "Can you tell me how much Rydale District Council is charging for your bin?" It's very obvious what I'm asking for, and it's absolutely not commercially sensitive.
I wasn't talking about the charges that Rydale District Council charge. I was talking about the charges that other operators charge, which I think is what
Well, that's easy. You just ring them up. That's really simple.
Well, but that's fine.
No, I asked for a tariff from this council. I've asked for it repeatedly.
Yeah.
Still not emerged.
Do we have that information, Becky? Thank you.
It's available on Scarborough Borough Council website. Scarborough Borough Council are very explicit in advertising their waste collection services for their holiday lets. I think we should be doing the same.
I think Becky's going to.
Yeah, if I could come in then. So in terms of the pricing that we would charge for a holiday let that receives the domestic waste collection service, which is, as I've said earlier, it's a very distinct group of properties that we service for waste collection. So a typical holiday let receiving the domestic waste collection service, like any domestic property, which is 1 week refuse collection, 1 week recycling. One of the recommendations is that we actually have a charge that we levy for holiday let specifically, which we don't currently have. And on that basis, which I can share after the meeting to members, is that the prices that we do charge for that service, I can confirm, are below the price that a competitor would charge, because we've done research into that particular bin size, because predominantly the bins that Holdylets have are the same as any other domestic property. The prices that are commercially sensitive are the bit bigger bin sizes, where businesses ask the council for a service based on their specific requirements. We have a table of charges which is not on council's website, and also our competitors do not display their pricing, because it's very competitive, and we negotiate prices based on need and offer discounts depending on the size of the contract. So in terms of the specific price for a Holdylet, that is something that one of the recommendations is that we agree a price. It is consistent with other authorities across North Yorkshire to have one price for Holdylet, so that puts us in the very similar position to other councils now going into the new authority. And as I say, the pricing is actually currently cheaper than a mystery shop that we did with a.
Thank you, Becky. Are you able to answer the other question about historic? I imagine this would just be incredibly difficult retrospectively. So I'm not quite sure whether we could do that, Councillor Thackeray, but Becky might have a better idea than I do.
There is no plan to go back and try and work that out, but the exercise that I referred to prior to COVID, that was the exercise that the council undertook. We would do a comparison and check to see the position for the waste collection, and that was an annual exercise. We've changed that now. That will be an ongoing exercise. And just regarding the stickers, the reason we went to a smaller sticker, what we're finding is that a lot of time Holdy let owners are actually taking the bigger sticker off. They didn't want the Holdy cottage to our property to have the sticker on that said commercial waste. We did find that they were being peeled off, so the purpose of that was for our benefit, so we knew the bins that actually were commercial waste. But now we've got it on the in-cab as well, so it's just like a fallback.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point, that as it's recorded on the in-cab, whatever you call it, system, then the stickers are an added extra, really, rather than being absolutely the only sign we have of them. Thank you, Becky. Councillor Duncan.
Just following up on Councillor Thackeray's question. Sorry if I've missed it, Becky. Have we actually got an amount then that we're going to set as a charge? We know the charge which we're looking at service.
Not for 23-24, because we're just working on the budgets at the moment, but to give you an idea, we have 3 bands currently for pricing. In the current year, if we were setting that fixed price now for the 180 size bin, which is our standard issue for domestic waste collection, the annual price would be around £300.
So are we charging at the moment, or we're going to start charging from the next financial year once we set that amount?
We do charge a fee now, but we charge a fee based on a banded pricing structure. So depending where the property is, you pay, there's 3 bands. So the band 3 is the rural outlying properties. Band 1 is the towns, and then the band 2 is the rest. To enable us to promote a price, it would be like one price wherever you were as a Holdy cottage.
So just finally, I suppose that's fair, isn't it? So we're not disadvantaging people to be in more rural parts of the district, or I suppose moving forward, more rural parts of North Yorkshire. So my understanding is then that this is actually about, there's 2 answers. There's the enforcement part, but there's people who aren't paying at the moment for service and have been receiving it in effect for free. And then there's the element of setting this standardised charge across the district moving.
Yes, that's correct.
Do we have any other questions? No? Okay. The recommendations are on page 27. I'm happy to move those from the chair again, if I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor. I don't know who was first, but anyway, Councillor Arnold. Okay, do members want to debate this matter further? Happy with the recommendations? Yeah. Okay. In that case, can we take, I think we can probably take this by general affirmation. There doesn't seem to be any great with it, so thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Becky. So moving on to item 11, the review of the Rydell plan, key decisions paper for consultation. And this very weighty tome is pages 45 to 590. I think we've got both Jill and Rachel to present on this one. I did wonder, and I probably should have asked you this, you've done your preamble, I did wonder whether we should go through per section and do it that way, because otherwise I think the debate could potentially go all over the place.
I think that's a very good idea.
Thank you. So
Thank
if we
you.
can proceed on that in that way, that would be very helpful. Are you first, Rachel?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So item 11, the key decisions on the review of the Rydell plan. This is a key stage in what we call pre-publication plan making process. What it seeks to do is to establish some key principles as points for debate and via consultation. It's also part of a benchmarking exercise, effectively, to evaluate what we consider to be the sustainability and viability considerations against our current local plan. It's not the finished article, and there will be further additional consultation to be undertaken. It's very much to be viewed as a pragmatic and targeted review, with the local government reorganisation taking place and the new local plan being prepared for North Yorkshire. And it's been trying to balance members' aspirations with the tests of soundness and reducing the uncertainties for the new council in taking forward their work on the new local plan, as well as also adopting ultimately the review of the Rydell plan. We are seeking legal advice on our consulted approach on the rolling of the plan forward, or what other options that we have in terms of the plan period for the Rydell plan review. We've got King's Council advice being sought, as we feel ultimately that a 15-year plan period is ultimately not necessary. This review is also still subject to various technical and procedural assessments which are currently being undertaken. We also need to have a steer really to help staff further assess the over 300 sites that we've had submitted. I'd just like to say that the work of the local plan working party has been absolutely crucial in the developing of these recommendations before you tonight. I wasn't going to go and read through all the individual elements of the recommendations, but just suffice to say that there are no changes to those recommendations. But ultimately, the key objective of the review is to bolster the land supply. And there are other policy aspirations that we are seeking to achieve, but the key one is the delivery of a robust land. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So, this is a substantial document, which I'm assuming you have all read. My proposal is that we go through it by section to ask the questions as well, Rachel. So if we start on page, sorry, I've just moved off the page I was on. Apologies, members. If we start on page 49 with the small scale windfall housing schemes. Do you want to say any more about that at this stage, Rachel, or do you just want to take questions, any questions that members have?
I think I'll go straight to questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So members, do we have any questions on this aspect of the report? Councillor Duncan?
Thanks. Sorry, I've not been involved in this review by not being the chairman of this working party. I just wanted to check in terms of the windfall housing schemes. So this is in addition to the more major allocations, so that it's actually opportunities to 5 dwellings to be approved in those actions. It doesn't have to be, and it's coming on later in terms of occupancy. You don't have to demonstrate any particular 5 dwellings or less, they can be. See.
Yes, that's correct. They would be treated as windfall sites, and it's in members' gift in relation to the consideration around, say, for example, the local needs occupancy. Obviously, in this key decisions consultation, we are seeking to remove the local needs occupancy, but if through this discussion and the making of recommendations, it was determined that actually it was to be sustained, then I think it would be probably something then we'd have to look into adding into this particular policy approach that we are working through. But as it's written, it's not intended that there would be any form of local occupancy to be applied. Thank you.
Just in terms, I think it's a welcome approach to try and promote development in. My only query is in terms of controlling scale and the obviously each individual proposal is 5 dwellings, but is there any constraints of cumulatively there being 10 for example? Control would we have over potential over some locations?
As it's currently worded, it would not stop multiple 5 dwelling or less schemes coming forward. I think what certainly in terms of the way the criteria-based policy would work, there would be sort of environmental constraints and slight considerations would need to be taken into account. Also, as well, in terms of the approach, we are seeking to ensure that if larger sites are allocated, that they don't come forward incrementally on this basis. And also, when one of the criteria, it talks about not incrementally adding on to a small scheme and then another small scheme and then another scheme, partly because that may actually increase the amount of, say, ribbon development, increase issues around backland sites as well and residential relations. But as it's worded, yes, you could have a number of sites. If that's a concern for members, we could.
Just thought I'd raise that now, opposed to the sort of ambition, but it's just a concern that developers who have land may well try creative ways to ensure they get best value out of that, getting the approval.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? If not, I'll bring Councillor Thackeray in.
Sorry?
Yeah, if you want to speak.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of expand on what Rachel's answer to Councillor Duncan. One of the criteria that is still to be included, I believe, is the development limit of a village. Therefore, unbridled development of one of the so-called other villages is highly unlikely if it is to remain within the development limits of that settlement. Sorry, you're looking a bit perplexed here. We tried during the working party to encourage members to accept a formal allocation of numbers of houses into the other villages, each village being looked at in turn and a percentage, perhaps, let's say 10% expansion of those villages over a planned period. But the officers were disinclined to accept our suggestion that they should be included as part of the formal land allocation. So I don't think Councillor Duncan's fears are in any way, I mean, you know, by all means have those fears, but they're not going to come to fruition.
Thank you, Councillor Thackeray. Rachel, do you want to respond to that? Yes,
if I can. Under policy SP2, which is the policy on the distribution of housing development, within development limits, there is already the capability to have small-scale windfall sites, but they come forward on the basis that they are subject to the local needs occupancy condition. Now, in terms of this process, we are looking to lift that. This particular policy is actually to deal with sites that are outside of development limit, to be clear. So in effect, there would be a relaxation from the current local plan, because the local needs occupancy condition has been restrictive. And this approach would then be a further relaxation on our existing approach, because currently, if sites are outside of development limits within the other villages, they would only be coming forward on the basis of a very specific identified need, because they're technically within the open countryside.
Can I just add to that, Chair? The background to this policy is that the outset of the work on the review of the plan, quite a few members have shown quite a lot of interest in the review of development limits. We felt that we didn't have the capacity or the time to do a full-scale review of development limits. And I think it's probably fair to say the review of the development limits was to allow some further development in some of the rural villages. So this policy was a criteria-based policy, which would give some flexibility in that respect.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews, you were, sorry, I thought Councillor Joy Andrews, were you indicating you were just looking puzzled? Okay. Councillor Paul Andrews.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Rachel, if you could help Councillor Duncan satisfy his concerns. I mean, the first bullet point says the policy applies to sites adjacent to development limits of all settlements. That means outside. Proposals will not be supported. They are not contiguous with part of the existing development limits, so they have to be contiguous to the development limit settlement, or are attached to an earlier scheme previously considered under this policy. Now that does that help to address Councillor Duncan's concerns?
I think actually only Councillor Duncan can say that they address his concerns, but in essence it's to stop basically a position where you have, yeah, incrementally a site on another site on another site on another site being developed.
Have any other? Mr. Thackeray, is this a
Yes,
comment rather than a question?
picking up on what Rachel says, I think what Rachel's describing there is the way in which Moulton and Norton have been developed as one site and then another site and then another site in that kind of order. Again, for everybody's benefit, a few facts which betray the intense amount of energy placed on the local needs occupancy condition. In the past, since 2013, there have been 109 approvals, out of which there have been 64 completions, which gives you a clue as to the stymieing impact and controlling nature of that condition, which has led to the putrefaction, I would say, of some of our local villages, not just distribution of aspic.
Thank you, Councillor Thackeray. Okay, so we're looking for a form of words in paragraph 6.5 in relation to this approach. Do you want us to take all these at once at the end, Rachel, or would you like us to respond to the recommendations as we go through? Would it be easier to do it?
Yeah,
as we go through?
I think if we go through them sequentially,
yeah.
And just in relation to the wording, we've got a potential approach in paragraph 6.4.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So sorry, just for my clarification. So you want to go through them all and then take the recommendation? Just a second.
Just to take each recommendation individually and make a decision on that.
Okay, yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. That's what I thought. I didn't want to. Yes, Councillor Andrews, what were you going to say?
Yes, Chair, that's what I was hoping. I was hoping we'd be able to deal with sections as we go along and conclude each section as we go along.
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes. Thank you. So yes, so the recommendation is on page 50 for this item, this section of this item. I'm happy to propose that from the chair. Does anybody, could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Andrews. We take this by general affirmation. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. So moving on, consideration of occupancy conditions. Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So effectively, the recommendation is that as part of the review of the Rydale plan, we are proposing to delete the local needs occupancy condition. We're also proposing to not apply a primary residence condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on this one? Councillor Andrews?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. The family residence condition will not deliver affordable housing. Well, would you agree that neither does the policy which is proposed deliver affordable housing?
Rachel?
In terms of the allocations that we'll be making, the substantive sites will have a requirement of affordable housing on them. And there is nothing to stop the small scale sites coming forward within that sort of criteria based policy that we've just been discussing. If applications came forward for affordable housing on those schemes, they could be considered. So this is specifically around for members to understand the implications of continuing to apply the local needs occupancy condition that we currently have, and also the potential implications if we were to consider applying a primary residence condition. The 5% depreciation in value would not, for the most part, make properties that are coming onto the market in Rydale affordable for local people or other individuals.
Chair, what the question I'm asking is, the issue of affordability has got absolutely nothing to do either the local needs condition or the primary residence condition, does it?
Well, that's just making it clear that if members are thinking about imposing the conditions, they can't do so on a basis of that they are making properties affordable.
Just so long as that's not considered the reason why it shouldn't be introduced. It just applies to whatever policies you have in force. Then you said support within the working party. There was some support in the working party for a primary residence condition. Would you agree that the voting was for, against the primary residence condition and 3 in favour?
My recollection was that the vast majority of members did not support the application of a primary residence condition. There was 2 members who specifically advocated its implementation in the other villages.
Do you agree that the vote went for, against and 3 in favour?
Got the agenda, because members have just approved the minutes from that meeting.
Check.
There doesn't appear to be any votes on this minutes.
My recollection, Chair, is that it was 4 against and 3 in favour. I think Councillor Frank might be able to confirm that.
Yeah, that's what
And that's absolutely fine. So that would be the majority were not in favour of imposing a primary residence condition.
A majority of 1. The next thing is, you talk about there being no currently available data about holiday homes and secondary residence. Would you accept that Simon Thackeray has provided some figures? Show that.
We have had further information provided, and what it shows is that there is an issue with regards to second homes and not ordinarily resident occupancy of properties, but they are very much focused within the national park area of Rydal. They're not actually focused in the Rydal local plan area. Also, in relation to that, the national park already have a sequential approach that they apply to their dwellings, which is that all new dwellings are granted with a local needs occupancy condition on. And if that condition is lifted in due course, it is subsequently then replaced with a primary residence condition. They are already employing that within the national park.
Would you accept Councillor Thackeray's evidence in regard to the number of holiday lets that are in that are in the area? Growing number of holiday.
Holiday lets are in themselves not actually what the primary residence condition seeks to avoid. Holiday lets are part of the economy of a rural area. What is more of concern to local communities is the creation of dwellings that are then effectively not occupied on a regular basis. They can be left vacant for many months at a time, and they don't contribute to the economy or the sort of rural community fabric of those areas. Holiday lets are a separate matter, although they can, as we're having the discussion now, become interrelated and seen as being the same thing, when the reality is they're not necessarily the same thing.
Thank you, Chair.
Else have any further questions? Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, sorry, just on the same point around the primary residency condition. The name occurs in the title, I suppose, but the requirement of that would be that can't be someone's second property. They have to live there residence. I suppose that would then only apply to those newly built up to 5 dwelling developments on just outside of the development policy. So it wouldn't actually do anything to help where there is already perhaps a prevalence of second homes within the Rydal National Park area. It would only apply to newly built properties. And my related question is that I suppose our reasoning for removing the local needs occupancy clause, that as has been pointed out, that's stifling. So we're giving approval potentially, but it's stifling the construction. There'd be a similar impact if we were by a primary residence condition, because if that's the case, that would potentially be a reason not to put primary residency condition in the revision of the plan.
Yes, in relation to your first point, yes, it would only affect new properties that have the grant of a planning permission, and on that planning permission, a condition will be applied requiring that they are subject to effectively permanent occupancy. It wouldn't affect existing dwellings. In terms of the current local needs occupancy condition, that was very much a policy tool to ultimately restrict the supply. And certainly we think as officers, if that condition is lifted, there will be an uplift in housing delivery in both within the development limits of other villages, but also if this criteria-based policy comes along, yes, there would be further dwellings coming forward.
So if our hope is to promote new development, so that, for example, families in schools and shops and pubs and all the various different facilities that people using the vitality of village, actually having any of these restrictions and clauses potentially the best way of promoting that sort of growth, future sustainability, because if you've got a development of 5, it'd be hard to imagine that all 5 of those second residency, I think. So actually, even if you had 5 and one of the second property, you've still got 4 new families or people generation.
Yes, that's the ultimate intention of what we're seeking to do. The Rydal plan had a very strong focus on delivery at the market towns and the service villages, with very much local needs being met elsewhere. What is happening with the review of the Rydell plan is it's meeting needs, but it's not applying a sort of local specific dimension. So yes, you know, that is the intention, that you know, to have an increase, but not a significant increase in housing delivery outside of the sort of established settlements where we would normally make allocations.
Thank you, Rachel. Any? Yeah, I think as Thackeray. Is anybody else on the committee? Questions? Councillor Thackeray?
Yes. Principal or primary residence condition. I think there's a little bit of good news in Rydell, because one of the major landowners has expressed a view on this. I was in Slingsby Village Hall when the public meeting was held with Mr. Howard and his team of helpers. And if members know probably already, that there's proposal by Slingsby to increase the size of Slingsby almost double the size by adding another 300 houses. And Welburn, which I think is on this stitched into these papers somewhere as potentially becoming another service village, Castle Howard wanting to build another 200 houses in Welburn. With the benefit of a mobile phone and a recorder, I can tell you exactly what Castle Howard said at that meeting. And the representative, when a member of the village was expressing deep concern about the proliferation of holiday cottages, holiday lets, Castle Howard representative said the following: Rydell is considering putting a primary residence restriction on all new housing so they can't be rented out as a holiday let. So maybe the officers would like to expand on that in terms of the discussions with Castle Howard.
Thank you.
There was a round of applause, strangely, in the village hall at that moment.
Thank you, Councillor Thackeray. I think we need to be quite careful, because obviously the Castle Howard development is still in the fairly early stages. So I think
It's the
quite
submitted
careful what we
public
say.
document. Thank you,
Yeah,
Chairman.
yes, it is, but I still think we need to be quite careful in the comments we make about it. Rachel, can you respond to?
Yeah, if I can come in. The consultation document actually does, in terms of what it talks about, it does identify, it says, you know, that we're not proposing to apply the primary residence condition, but also it's saying, do you agree with this? So we will still be getting feedback on that. Also, in relation to Castle Howard, if Castle Howard want to seek to deliver some housing, I'm not going to commit either as officers or the local planning authority or Rydell District Council to any of the sites that have been submitted. But as a landowner and as a tenant, there is nothing to stop them through the conveyancing process to use a occupancy designation criteria should they wish to. That would be a restrictive covenant. It would not be part of the planning process, but if they want to retain some of their properties, and I believe that they do want to do so, it may well be that they do want to apply a eligibility criteria that may have a geographical focus to it. If they are wanting to attract people into the local area who may be wanting to work at Castle Howard, because they do have recruitment and retention issues in relation to getting staff onto to work for them, and being able to access housing at a price that they can afford. So if the district council did not implement the primary residence condition, there's actually nothing to stop Castle Howard Estate or any other landed estate from applying their own covenant if they wish to.
Thank you, Rachel. I think something you said right at the start of that statement is really important, that we need to bear in mind that this is a document that's going out for consultation. So it's not just our views around this table, it will also be open for consultation, so other views will also be expressed. So, Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, just one last question, Chair. bearing in mind that Castle Howard are prepared to accept a primary residence condition, they were asked, doesn't this show that the use of a primary residence condition not reduce the price of property to such an extent that it will actually discourage building?
I think we'll wait and see what the outcome of the consultation is. I think that in terms of how officers are considering the potential for, in the future for a primary residence condition, we think that, and it's what's been experienced across other parts of the country, this is very much a local settlement specific sustainability, social sustainability issue. And where it was first debated, discussed and adopted was through a neighbourhood plan down in St Ives. It has now moved into various other neighbourhood plans, and it's also made its way into a local plan in Northumberland. But the way that that policy works in Northumberland, it has a very sort of geographic basis, and it expects that in order to be implemented, there has to be at least 20% of properties to be non-ordinarily resident in their occupancy. And that ultimately means that it only applies to very specific parts of the local plan area. And when you look at their housing supply and the way their allocations are distributed, the vast majority of their allocations are not in areas where the primary residence condition is being imposed, because it's coming about because those particular parts of certainly Northumberland, they have a long-standing tourist economy, and it's an integral part of the character of some of those places. So they have quite significant second home ownership in those particular locations. So that's how it's come about in those specific areas, and there's nothing to stop local communities in Rydal, if they feel it's a specific issue for their villages, their communities, to seek to explore this through the neighbourhood plan process. And we also think as well that in terms of, for example, Scarborough, it's been in the press that Whitby are looking at seeking to bring forward a primary residence condition, and so it's not something that is unique to Rydal. And I think that the new local plan will be a primary vehicle to consider the application of a primary residence condition going forward into the future for North Yorkshire as a whole, effectively.
Rachel, how many villages, parishes in Rydal do you think have got the facility to prepare their own neighbourhood plan? The second question is, where is there going to be in this plan provision which allows neighbourhoods or or parishes to come forward with a neighbourhood plan which allows them to do this? Because I don't see it in any of the wording here.
It's a Localism Act that was introduced in 2011 that gives communities the ability to prepare local plans, prepare neighbourhood plans.
They have the ability to prepare a neighbourhood plan, but they don't have the ability to override the local plan. The neighbourhood plan has to be consistent with the local plan, and so unless the local plan makes provision for those parishes to be able to have neighbourhood plans which can apply the primary residence clause, then they will not be able to apply it.
Yeah, under our plan, they would be able to do that. It's in policy SP1. We talk about the development of neighbourhood plans and the fact that they may well have specific policy considerations that ultimately are not necessarily, well, there may be a departure from our local plan, but they don't necessarily undermine it. And there is a body of support that can be given to local communities in the preparation of their local plan, their neighbourhood plan. I keep saying local plan. Neighbourhood plans ultimately come from the community in terms of their scope and their content. So if it's a particular issue for a local community, it may well be that that becomes the sort of focus of their neighbourhood plan. That would be for those communities to explore that, and we as the local planning authority have a duty of responsibility to support those communities in making those plans.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Very quickly, you mentioned there about this 20% figure that applied. You may not know the answer to this, Rachel, and I'm not expecting you to, but I was just curious, how many villages would that apply to in the Rydale, the non-park part of Rydale, where we're responsible for setting the planning policies? Do we have an estimation of that?
Go over at Matt, and I think he's going to be able to give it to us.
Yep, that's absolutely fine, Matt. Thank you. Do we have any other comments from members? Okay, wait for that answer. Are you happy to?
That's got the answer.
Super quick, Matt. Thank you.
I didn't know what the answer would be, but my suspicion was it would be a very, very low answer, and therefore I think the whole debate around a primary residency condition is perhaps irrelevant in that case, given that it wouldn't materially affect, if we were to apply a similar policy, it wouldn't materially affect any, at the moment, any communities within non-park part of the district. I think it's also just wanting to make the point, we are just consulting on this at the moment, aren't we? It would seem to me to be a logical position for us to take, that if we're consulting, that we start from the basis of actually not recommending conditions and then see what comes back in terms of the consultation around if people think we should have conditions for this or for other things. That to me would be a logical thing, and I would imagine this will then come back, the consultation information, for us to consider what people have said and see if we still have the same opinion as we have starting point consultation.
Yes, I think that's that. Yes, it will come back for further discussion. So, Councillor Andrews?
Yes, Chair, I have, I realise that this is going to come back, but the trouble is that it's too far, it's far too closed a question that should be put to the question that should be put out for consultation is a far more open-ended one, to see whether or not people would like primary residence condition and not simply bar them out by saying no and giving a whole range of reasons for saying no before they've even started having a thought of having considered it. My proposal is that the second bullet point should be to propose the application of a primary residence condition on new properties where 10% of houses in a parish are used as holiday lets and or second homes. And I have notified all members of this, and it has been circulated, and I'm wondering if I have a seconder.
Have a seconder for that.
I do have a seconder, Chair.
Yeah, I'll second it. Would you like to speak to that?
Am I my microphone on? Yes, right. Yeah, I mean, this has really come home to me when I saw the house opposite me, which was just an ordinary ex-council house, put on the market. It was a Rydale Housing Association house, put on the market, and I sort of inquired as to where it was going to be put on the market, and I was told the Grand Connaught Rooms, Great Queen Street, London. Then I asked about the range of interest, and they said, well, what they do is they circulate everybody as widely as possible, and they will take bids by auction from the internet, from telephone and whatever throughout the whole country. And then I realise why perhaps the people of Whitby are getting a little bit concerned. And right, and Hampton is only a small village. It's not a very pretty village. It's a lot. I mean, I love it, but it's not particularly attractive. And we've got about 3 holiday homes there. We've agreed to delete the local needs occupancy condition. We've agreed a criteria-based policy which will allow building new homes outside village development limits. We know that Rydale is a well long-standing holiday area. We actually encourage it. So one can assume that many houses will be built in the village areas. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of people do we want to see living in these houses? Do we want the new houses to be occupied by people who are going to use the village shops, the village schools and the village pubs? Do we want to bring back new life into the villages? Because that's what I thought we were up to. That's why we're doing this. Or are we content to allow large numbers of these houses to be left wide open for use as holiday lets or second homes by people who will make no use of village schools, pubs, local services or shops? Yes, holiday lets do bring in customers during the summer months, not in the winter months, or not so many in the winter months. I've spoken to several members about this. They are understandably reluctant, as is Councillor Duncan, reluctant to impose a blanket restriction on all new houses, as they think that the pressure of holiday accommodation and second homes is not as great in Rydale as near the coast or on the moors, and they're probably right. So what I've done is I've compromised and suggested that the condition will only be imposed if 10% of houses in the parish or town concerned are already occupied as holiday lets and or second homes. This is in line with the 20% precedent set by Northumberland Council. Now, if the officers are right, and there are very few holiday lets come up, very few of these houses are turned into holiday lets, and very few second homes, then no primary residence clause will be imposed. It is only triggered if that 10% point is reached. So therefore, if the officers are right, and there isn't going to be a problem, we can all safely carry on and forget about it. But if it does become a problem, we're in a position to do something about it. I don't think, I cannot see the average village council getting around to doing neighbourhood plans. The towns might. Towns are, in fact. And I think to expect neighbourhood plans to do that is not something that's pragmatic. I'll just there may be questions of enforcement. The enforcement, I'm not talking about involving a whole new army of enforcement officers. Every planning application comes before a parish council. The parish clerk will know the rules, and if the parish is getting concerned about the number of holiday lets or second homes in the village, they will know that they can draw this to the district council's attention, or the county council's attention then, and they will be able to do something about it. Not in respect of houses which have already been built, but certainly in respect of new houses.
Nearly concluded.
I've almost completed. Well, I'll finish there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Docker, did you want to comment? Third?
Yeah, well, I'll just say briefly that I think the 10%, we won't hit it in villages. So actually, I don't think it'll new builds in most desperately crying out for. That the figures are there, you know, suddenly does become dated with residences. That I don't think it's there for the future. It'll take us a long time to get to that situation, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan? Oh, sorry.
My concern, Councillor Andrews, is you've just mentioned sort of lumping the holiday lets in with second homes, and as the officer pointed out, Rachel pointed out earlier, that is a big boost for the local economy and provides local jobs and things like that as well. So I don't think I'd be comfortable supporting lumping them both together.
Councillor Andrews. Councillor Duncan?
My query was similar to Joy's, which was obviously, does a holiday let class as a second residency? So would it be part of that percentage calculation? And is that something which there is precedent for, was my first question. The second question was, Matt, about 20%. Do we have a figure on 10%, which might also help us put this into some context?
Yes, in relation to holiday lets, in terms of the government's permitted development rights, you can have a dwelling and you can let it out as a holiday let without needing planning permission. That can just happen. Where it becomes more controlled is where a development plan has effectively placed a restriction on where residential development can take place. But more often than not, that would allow a holiday let, tourist let, to be allowed. And that then means that it can only be used as a holiday let, and it can't then change its use to a dwelling. So there will be situations where dwellings are used as holiday lets, and they are used on a regular, continual basis, and they are bringing a degree of income and revenue into a location. The primary residence condition has primarily come about to deal with second homes, where basically the properties are vacant for extended periods of time and they aren't let out on a commercial basis for holiday use. And I was going to ask Matt to come in and advise us on how many settlements in Rydal would be subject to the 10%. And I was also just going to mention, before you come in, Matt, the fact that we are still waiting on the census information from 2021, and that will give a more up-to-date picture. At the moment, we are working off the 2011 census and council tax records. Matt, if you want to come in, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any other comments or? Councillor Thackeray, I'm very aware that we've got a lot still to get through, so keep your comments brief, please.
Yeah, holiday
Thank
let. Holiday let, to qualify as a holiday let, you just have to advertise your house and make it available to let for 140 days a year, I believe. There's no other requirement placed upon you, nothing to stop the owner living in London, owning a holiday home, making it available to let, but not letting it and just using it for weekends. And guess what? No council tax, no business rates. Bingo. Everyone a winner. So it is not as simple as it looks on the surface. So what you think is a holiday let could well be a second home, just called a holiday let. And yeah, it's good for the economy, but I don't know whose.
Thank you, Councillor Thackeray. Any other comments? Not, will, sorry, councillor Duncan.
So I know I asked some questions. Just wanted to sort of speak to it, really, just to say that I can understand the arguments. Second, understand that in parts of North Yorkshire, particularly in the national parks, where that has become dominant sort of percentage of a village, understand that being a problem in terms of sort of sustainability of those communities. I do think that second homes are very different to holiday lets. Holiday lets are an integral part of tourist economy. I think that if they are regularly used, I think they are using shops and facilities and attractions, and I think they do contribute to the district's economy. So I think it's important to sort of distinct those two things out. I'm not quite clear about the definition precedent for lets and second homes and whether a primary residency clause would actually even apply in those situations. I'm still slightly unclear about the definition in terms of 10% as well. Obviously, that's referred to the example of that within the district. I feel as if for the purposes of consultation, to complicate this by specifying a percentage or introducing a clause, because I think that might muddy the waters slightly. I think if residents or businesses or anyone who wants to reply to the consultation has a particular need that they think we haven't addressed with a clause or restriction, I think that's the type of thing we want to raise. I wouldn't want to give an indication we're looking at a very specific proposal, and then be, to get bogged down in the detail of that, because 10% might be right, 20% might be right, 5% might be right. It might not be right at all, but I think for purposes of consultation, to me, what's being laid out here is actually the simplest. If I didn't know anything about this and I was looking at this to reply, I think I would then say, actually, I think there should be consideration given to X, Y, or Z issue. I think that could be addressed once we get feedback back to us. So I don't think I'm going to support what's been put forward just on the basis of simplicity. However, Councillor Andrews may well be proved right, and we may well decide to go along with some sort of clause or condition when we actually make the final approval based on what comes in the consultation. I wouldn't want to sort of change it now.
Thank you. Councillor Ivy?
Thank you, Chair. It's something that's occurred to me while I've been listening to the conversations, speeches tonight, and the value of holiday lets for the economy. Yeah, I understand the seriousness of the holiday trade in the area. However, I think what I can gather, the retailers in the small market towns are becoming more and more desperate, and despite the increased number of holiday lets, they're really struggling. So I think you can overplay, or you are overplaying, the value to local shopkeepers, publicans, and the like. The value of the economy, the increase in the economy to them by having more and more holiday lets. I think the van comes at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, delivers the food for the week, and they don't go into the shops, I think, very often in the cases. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ivy. Okay, I think Councillor Andrews, just back to you briefly, please.
Is this my summing up, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah. The main concerns I have, Chair, is the way this recommendation is worded. It's not open-ended, it is closed. Now, I mean, it may well be that following the consultation, we want to make changes to that. But the way it's so worded, it's not actually giving anybody a choice. It's saying this is what you should have, either yes or no. And that is my main concern. The primary residence condition should be considered as an open-ended question. Do you think a primary residence condition would be a good idea? If so, why or why not? To actually have a recommendation that it's proposed that it doesn't happen, I think is completely wrong. And it's basically for that reason as I put forward my my proposed amendment, which I will still ask people to vote on, please. If people want to amend it by taking out the word holiday lets and so that it simply reads to propose the application of a primary residence condition on new properties where 10% of houses in the parish are used as second homes, so be it. I mean, that's an amendment which can be put forward, and I could well support that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. So are you proposing that we take out the words holiday lets in your amendment?
No, I think they should be, as Councillor Ryby says, I think it should be in.
Okay.
But if other people want to propose an amendment, yes, that's on that
Well-
basis. Yes, I would consider it. My point as all the time, Chair, is that you want people living in these houses who are going to use local services, local shops,
Yep.
and so on. And I think Councillor Ryby is right. And I also think that when people come to stay here, they frequently come to stay here so they can go somewhere else, they are not necessarily contributing to the local economy at all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews. Well, I think we'll have to go with your initial wording at this stage. So could members please vote on Councillor Andrews' amendment? So, oh, sorry, Councillor Docker, did you want to say anything? Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that in the distribution of development consultation that we did back in sort of November through to March of this year, we actually consulted on should we impose a primary residence condition. That was what we asked. In the consultation document before you, it's question 5 on page 85 of the agenda, we say, do you agree with the approach to not propose the application of a primary residence condition? So therefore, we are giving people the opportunity to say either, yes, we agree with that approach to not include it, or they may disagree and say, no, we want you to impose it, and these are the reasons why. We are giving the ability to provide an open response as people see fit.
That is not a question asking for an open response, Chair. It's a question, do you agree that we're right? Instead of asking the question, what do you think about it?
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I won't prolong this a great deal further, but I think members of the public and people that want to respond to this will be able to read that recommendation and comment in the way that they see fit, because it is, yeah, it's quite clear that you could respond positively or negatively to it. But anyway, can we take the amendment, please? Could those in favour please show?
Yes, you have. So that's 4. Oh, no, sorry. 4 for, 5 against.
Well, Chair, I'll just ask officers to take the small majority into account when they start wording their consultation document.
Yeah, I think the decision has been voted on, Councillor Andrews. So could we now move to the summary of the recommendations that you have in front of you on page 51? Sorry, did somebody not vote? Can we go back to the summary of the recommendations on this item then, which are halfway down page 51? I propose those from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? I propose that from the chair. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Docker. Vote now, please, members.
because I agree with part one, with point one. I don't agree with point two. And it would, so I voted against it. I hope it's clearly understood that I am against the removal of the local needs occupancy condition.
Okay, thank you, councillor Andrews.
Chairman,
sorry.
sorry,
Yeah.
all we're doing tonight is voting whether we
On a
want to ask
consultation.
people
Yeah.
on these points. It doesn't, my vote doesn't necessarily mean I agree with anything. I do, as it happens, but there may well be things I'm happy to consult people on I don't necessarily agree with.
Sorry, Chair, I don't think councillor Ryby voted. It's 7-4 and
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair. So yes, embedding climate change mitigation and adaptation has been another element of the plan review that has effectively morphed and expanded on probably what we originally thought the Rydale plan review would actually look at. There's two parts to the review of policy SP18, and that's the policy that's principally concerned with trying to deliver a greater proportion of renewable energy across the district and to look at sustainable building standards. So effectively, the consultation has split it into two parts. The first part looks at the consideration of standalone renewable and low carbon energy technologies. And in terms of the work that we've done, we feel that broadly the policy works well as it is. It is somewhat limited by the fact that currently, because we've not had very much technical information about the suitability and capability of the area being taken forward for specific renewable energy technologies, we've not been able to identify any specific areas. Currently, national planning policy requires that, particularly in relation to onshore wind schemes, that such areas have to be identified in a local plan. And that means that they've been subject to a considerable degree of public scrutiny and in order for them to be taken forward. But as it stands, we have not been able to do that. So we have the current criteria-based policy as it effectively is written in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think this may be one that in the consultation you will get a lot of feedback. I strongly suspect. Do members have any questions, comments at this one? Councillor Duncan?
Just my understanding is that while there may well be more that we might be able to do in the future, actually in terms of the timescales that we've got right now for this limited review of the plans, actually not very much we can really do. So we're just trying to prioritise on the key areas. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Essentially, it comes into the second part of the review of policy SP18, which is to look at enhancing opportunities for what we term decentralised energy generation opportunities. It's very much looking at the sort of local scale delivery of renewable energy and also looking at the design of development. But we'll come on to that in the next recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, just out of interest, there's a lot of mention of wind power in here, not very much of other technologies. Is that something that is because we are sort of constrained and we've had to sort of mention the wind turbines and we've not mentioned water or solar or anything else, or is it that's because what we're expecting that main area of development?
It comes there is a specific mention around wind turbines, and it comes back to the position that is currently in national planning guidance and national policy, which is effectively in relation to onshore wind. The government has a specific mandate that it implemented. I think it was back in it might have been I think it's maybe 2014. A ministerial statement came out which said that in effect, in order for onshore wind schemes to come forward, they had to be identified in a local plan and they had to be subject to significant public consultation, and for that to find it favourable to having the wind turbine. what the government policy has not done is then rolled that out to hydro, solar. It's remained more less clear on that. It's effectively given local planning authorities the ability to look at proposals on a more ad hoc basis, effectively. So that's why we have a criteria-based policy, which we could use to look at effectively all forms of renewable low carbon technology, but it just would not be sort of advancing anything in relation to wind. And it is a disappointment for officers that in this review we have not been able to identify any areas. What I can say is that in terms of the work on the new local plan, when that sort of really kicks into gear, there will be technical documents that are currently in production across the sort of North Yorkshire geography that will set out in a more technical way what is technically feasible across the piece. That will then need, I think, to be overlain by sort of the consultation process and the collation of a lot of other additional information to then ultimately derive some areas of opportunity for large scale standalone renewable energy generation. What it doesn't mean is that we can't seek to progress renewable technologies through a decentralized system of looking at our allocations and our individual sites and seeking to promote not necessarily prescribed standards, but seeking to promote some form of renewable technology on those. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I was just concerned that we were neglecting the other things, but it's just because it was the regulations that you've got to go through. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, do we have any other questions, comments on? I think Rachel has explained very clearly position is on this one. So the recommendation is on the top of page 53. I'll move that from the chair. If I can have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Joy Andrews. Okay, could we vote on this one now, please? Thank you.
That's 9-4.
Thank you. So moving on again, sustainable build standards. Rachel, over
Thank
to
you, Chair.
again. Thank you.
So yes, where we have been able to make more progress, for want of a better expression, I hope members feel this way, is that we are looking to enhance the water use standards to 110 litres per person per day, which is a tighter standard than current building regulations. We're proposing to continue to use the established BREEAM standards for commercial development and to also require in a more robust way the implementation of the effectively energy hierarchy across all development sites. And in doing that, require us the submission of a sustainability statement which seeks to both ensure that developments are reducing their energy needs and also that they are looking to utilise where possible decentralised renewable or energy low carbon energy generation on their schemes, and that's certainly in relation to allocations. And we also want to explore whether we can extend this to the windfall sites, for example, those within the criteria-based policy. What we are not seeking to do at this stage is to set specific targets for compliance with regards to a proportion of renewable energy usage. That's in relation to, for example, CO2 emissions, or for example, the technologies that are built. That's partly because it inherently can data plan, and it can also make it more challengeable in relation to considering viability considerations. If we keep the policy a little bit more flexible, then it gives us the ability to require a contribution, but without necessarily undermining any of our allocations or any other development proposals that may come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Does anybody have any questions on this section? Questions? Like to make your comment then, Councillor Andrews?
Just ever so briefly, I mean, I think this is the best we can do with what we've got to work with, and I think it's appalling that national policy isn't any better, and we could really really go to town, as it were, and as long as we're not getting the support from the government, and the government needs to catch up and quickly on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Anybody else? If not, I suggest we move straight to vote on this one. I'll propose that from the chair again, if that's okay. Councillor Joy Andrews is second. Go to the vote, please. Thank you.
Sorry. Unanimous. No.
Thank you, members. So moving swiftly on, accessibility and space standards. I think this is another one that hopefully we will be able to deal with quite quickly, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, effectively, what the plan review is seeking to do is to effectively make the current policy that we have in Policy SP4 of requiring on sites of 50 or more dwellings that they have a current 5% requirement for bungalows, and effectively it's to seek to make those bungalows work harder by requiring them to be built to what is effectively building regulations wheelchair user accessible standard. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sort of hoping nobody has any questions on this, because it seems to me this is a no-brainer and we should just be doing it, definitely. So we, I want to the vote, please. I'll propose it from the chair. Can I have a seconder again, please? Thank you, Councillor Arnold.
That's unanimous.
To make brief reference to the Gypsy and Travellers sites, Rachel?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I will just give members a brief update. We have still not concluded the Gypsy and Traveller accommodation assessment. So at this point in time, we're not able to give a sort of formal view on regards to what the local plan review will need to do. I think it's fair to say that as well, because we're potentially looking at pitches, we might well be doing that from a site-specific point of view. So I think it'll be best ultimately considered when we're consulting and exploring the site allocations on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you. The next one is the plan for figure.
Yes, so effectively what the consultation seeks to do is to effectively sustain the current plan for figure of 200 homes per year. That is the figure that's in our existing development plan, and effectively it's 14 dwellings more than the current national standard method calculation for establishing a sort of baseline housing need. Our SHMA has, that's a strategic housing market assessment, has identified that we can either sustain the standard method figure, and it's advocated that we do that. But effectively, our existing plan requirement is only 14 dwellings a year more than that. And we think that in terms of a positive approach, and given it's a review of our existing development plan, we're seeking to simply sustain that figure.
Thank you, Rachel. Does anybody have any questions or points on that? Councillor Paul Andrews?
This is on the, this is not on the gypsies, it's on the figure of 200, is it? Right. Well, first of all, questions. Do officers accept that it is government policy to allow a windfall allowance to be made in respect of houses built within villages and outside village development limits in accordance with our criteria-based policy? In other words, can we make a windfall assumption in respect of those properties?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, national policy absolutely does allow local planning authorities to make a windfall allowance when they are preparing their development plans. However, it comes with a very significant caveat if you are doing that, and that is the fact that ultimately, whilst local planning authorities can do that, what they're also tasked with, and it's a requirement of national policy, is that they deliver their objectively assessed housing need. And as soon as you bring into the effectively the plan requirement, relying on a proportion of windfall sites to come forward, those windfall sites cannot be relied upon. They are effectively coming forward outside of the plan process. They're not formal allocations, and we can't effectively rely on them to come forward. What that means is that it raises implications during the examination process, because in our experience, the principal key element of a plan is the housing requirement. That's the thing that's most contested, and parties who are seeking for their sites to come forward, they will look at that figure and they will challenge it. And certainly in relation to the appeals process as well, they will look at the housing land supply position. Where we do factor in windfalls automatically is in the calculation of the 5-year land supply. And that's effectively an annual calculation of the likely delivery of housing over a 5-year period. And they have to be deliverable sites. So it's our allocations, or it's sites that have obtained planning permission that we believe are likely to come forward. And they form our 5-year land supply. And that's an important calculation for the consideration of planning applications, where speculative housing proposals come forward. And so they don't get ignored. They are factored in, but they're factored in through the point of view of the ongoing implementation of the development plan, as opposed to at the point that the development plan is being formulated. So we would advocate to not have a windfall allowance included. Thank you.
Well, coming back on that, Chair, would you accept that before the 2013 plan came into effect, 48% of all new houses were built in the rural areas outside of towns?
Yes, I would. And that was because we had a spatial approach at the time, which did not focus development at the market towns. And and also as well, in terms of national policy at the time, housing targets were seen very much as a ceiling. You were effectively not expected to exceed a target. So we didn't actually make very many allocations within the 2002 Ryedale local plan. As a result, that led to significant development across the district, and ultimately actually led to the development of the Ryedale local plan having a more sort of focus on the market towns.
So what we're doing now is we're keeping those allocations of 200 houses. They're the allocated ones, but we're now having, in addition to that, we're saying that houses can be built all around the villages as well, and the local needs occupancy condition can come off, which you said yourself was something which is intended to stop or restrict development. That will come off. So you're having, so aren't we going to end up with sort of houses coming out of areas?
Well, it's been discussed and debated through the local plan working party that in terms of the performance of the Rydale plan, the local needs occupancy condition in terms of what it was intended to do, it's worked very well. It really has restricted the supply of sites coming forward outside of our allocations. We now feel that as a policy approach is not positive. It's not an appropriate approach, and so we are seeking to lift it. The criteria-based policy is another specific arm that has come about through the discussions that members have been having through the local plan working party and their frustrations with the development limits as they're currently drawn. And we have spoken at length through the local plan working party in terms of the implications for if in effect refining and changing the development limits outside of the formal allocation process and the complexities of doing that and the timescales for doing that. And it was ultimately felt by officers and members that a criteria-based policy would give some additional flexibility to bring forward very small scale developments in some of our smaller settlements. And that is the rationale why tonight we have the criteria-based policy, and we're seeking to lift the local needs occupancy condition.
I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is that by lifting the condition, allowing more development to be built in the villages, you're not doing anything to relieve the pressure on the towns, are you?
In terms of relieving pressure on the towns, the spatial approach that we are going to be discussing later on in this report, Malton and Norton and Pickering and Kirby Moorside will still be seen as areas for growth. They are our largest settlements in our district. But it is within our gift as part of this pragmatic partial review of the development plan to seek to allocate sites that we feel perform the best in relation to sustainability appraisal considerations, which means we aren't effectively bound to focus significant amounts of development at the market towns. That work is ongoing and still needs to be continued. But what members do need to be aware of is the fact that, yes, in relation to the fact if we remove the local needs occupancy condition, will we have increased housing delivery in our other villages? Yes, we will. Will we, in relation to the criteria-based policy, will that increase housing delivery in our other villages? Yes, it will.
So we're required by we're required by government policy to produce 200 houses. We're not producing 200 houses. We're producing 200 plus an almost unlimited number of houses in the villages. I mean, I'm sorry, Rachel. I just don't follow the rationale of this.
Effectively, as I was saying earlier, in terms of the plan requirement, we will need to have the allocations and we will need to have a land supply buffer. And we intend to make those as formal allocations through the plan making process. In relation to sites that then come forward on a windfall basis, they will form part of the housing land supply calculation that we do every year. Now, what we can't do is then subtract any housing off that. It effectively means that, yes, we will be delivering in excess of 200 homes a year, but there is nothing in planning policy to prevent that from happening. What it does require, though, is that our local plan, in terms of that criteria-based policy, it is precise, it is robust in making sure that when we are looking at releasing additional housing land for proposals, that they come forward on the basis that they are fundamentally plan compliant, that they are potentially also delivering additional benefits, such as they could be for affordable housing, They could be employing very stringent sustainable build standards. They will also be, I would have thought, providing additional housing choice, and they will be, it's hoped, providing housing that can then support community facilities and services in those villages in locations where for the last 10 years they've not had any significant housing come forward.
I wish, Chairman, I just wish the officers would just answer the question instead of going all instead of answering other.
I think,
Did-
I think,
did-
I think actually Rachel did answer the question very perfectly well, Councillor Andrews. Can we move on? Can we, I'm happy to propose this figure,
No, I-
sustain
I-
this figure, and
I want to make a proposal, Chair. My
Thank you.
my proposal is that it's an amendment. Well, I'll read the amendment first, and I'll find out if I got a seconder. That is that the proposal on paragraph 6.34 is amended by the addition of the addition in parentheses in paragraph in brackets words to include an annual windfall assumption 50 houses. So the summary recommendation will go on: sustain the plan figure of 200 houses per year, brackets, to include an annual windfall assumption of 50 houses, close brackets. That's my proposal.
have a seconder for that, Councillor Andrews.
Yes, I'll second it.
Thank you. Not 100% sure you need to say any more about this, Councillor Andrews, because I think you've explained your position, but if you want to say any more, please be brief.
I will, Chair, and it is an important point, so I would ask you to bear with me. The Rydale plan, as is, Chair, requires the allocation of 200 houses per annum next year until 2032. These 600 houses will come from Beverley Road site at Norton. So we're talking about 9 years. Of those 200 houses a year, 600 will come from Beverley Road and Norton, which will leave the rest, over 1,000, to come from Pickering and Kirby Moorside. And perhaps a few from service villages as well. No new allocations will be made from Helmsley. That's been made very clear. We've agreed new houses can be built in the villages as windfalls on the criteria-based policy. We've also agreed to delete the local needs occupancy condition. Both these changes will inevitably increase house building in the villages. We're advised not to take the additional houses these changes will generate into account. I cannot understand why new houses generated by these two changes in policy cannot be included in the annual housing target. Government policy says it can. The officers say that it might have difficulty in improve it, might have difficulty before the inspector, but that's what we employ consultants for. The officers accept that government policy allows a windfall assumption to be built into a council's annual house building target. I cannot understand how this can be described as less challenged than examination. We can show the quantity of houses built in country areas before the 2013 plan, which you've heard was 48%. So therefore, it shouldn't be very difficult to prove 25%, which is what I'm talking about with 50 houses. I don't understand what the relevance is of the 10% buffer, because this will apply in all respects, whether an allowance is made for windfall sites or not. But what really concerns me is when we started this process, the purpose, as I understood it, was to take the pressure off the towns. And this is exactly what we've done. What we've done is we've released land outside the towns without taking that land into account and without taking the pressure for development of the towns. That should concern everybody in this room.
Councillor Andrews, can I just say, I think Rachel does want to respond to this, but can I just say first of all, we are not making decisions on this evening. We are making decisions on what might go into a consultation document rather than actual decisions.
Well, that is why, Chair, I proposed that I proposed an amendment to the effect, if I can find the exact words again. That's why I proposed the amendments I have proposed, which is that there should be a windfall allowance of 50 new houses.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to that, Rachel, before we put that to?
Yes.
That would be a recommendation, Chair.
If I can come back with regards to the evidence base and Councillor Andrews talking about the past performance of a plan that predates our current plan that we are working to. The whole performance around the amount of development that took place outside of the market towns was a function of the distribution strategy that was in that former development plan, and the lack of allocations that plan ultimately made, and it led to a lot of windfall applications then subsequently coming forward. It is a natural thing that we would need to include our existing allocations, subject to making sure that they remain deliverable, into in effect the plan figure and the housing requirement. We would be looking to include the existing allocations and indeed the existing commitments that we already have, that have come forward even currently as windfall sites. We will factor those completions, which I think the actual amount, which I think is around 1,300 dwellings we currently have. They will be part of the effectively the housing requirement going forward. So we will take those into account.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Docker, do you want to come into seconder? Okay. Does anybody else want to speak on this amendment? Okay, we'll take the amendment straight to vote in that case. Thank you. So that amendment is lost. So could we now vote on the summary recommendation, which was to sustain the plan for a figure of 200 homes per year?
No, not yet. That's 8 for and 1 again.
Thank you, members. Moving on again, local government reform. This is about rolling forward the plan. Rachel, do you want to briefly explain this? I think hopefully if people have read their papers, they will understand why you're putting this forward.
Yes, so this is in relation to the fact that we feel that in terms of the review of the RIDO plan and the fact that the new authority needs to prepare its new local plan within 5 years of vesting date, it seems that it's not really appropriate for us to have a plan period as part of the review of 15 years. And so what we are consulting on, and this is subject to King's Council advice, is effectively rolling forward the plan period so that it will be from 2027 to 2032. So that's a period of 5 years, as opposed to what we previously consulted on, which would be taking the plan from 2024, when we will be likely to adopt, to 2038. So yes, the recommendation is to continue to proceed with a 5-year roll forward, subject to legal advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Do we know when the legal advice is likely to come?
We have a briefing with our barrister, on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions on that? It seems to make sense to me. Councillor Clark?
Yeah, just a real quick one. Do we know what other councils in York and North Yorkshire are doing on?
We have a good indication. There's 8 authorities, and work's been exploring where different authorities are at with their plan making process, because some authorities are very well advanced. For example, Selby, they have they're out at publication on their review, and it's really important for their land supply that they get their plan through. Harrogate also have a similar situation where they have a major urban extension that they're looking at, and the minerals and waste plan for the national park, and then Rydale's local plan review. Those are the 4 local plans reviews that are effectively being progressed. The other authorities were in the process of looking at reviewing their development plans, because ultimately reviews of development plans is a natural ongoing process that takes place. But they have decided, in terms of the risks to them not pursuing their reviews, they have a much more robust land supply. So they've decided that on that basis, they aren't likely to pursue their reviews. So there may well be some discussions around the implications of that for certain authorities in terms of what that could mean for them. But in terms of the decisions that have been made to date, the Rydale Plan Review is one that they want to continue with.
Thank you, Councillor Joy Andrews.
So basically, we're saying if we agree to this, if legal advice says that's fine, we can vote on this tonight rather than. Yeah, fine.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay, well, I will propose that from the chair. If we can vote on that one now, please. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Clark. We're just voting on the rolling forward of the plan, Councillor Andrews, if you'd like to vote on that recommendation on page 59. Wait for Councillor Arnold. Hopefully he's coming back. Do you want to start talking about the spatial principles? Rachel? Well,
Yes,
yeah.
happily. Thank you,
to do
Chair.
that,
Yes.
I think.
So the spatial principles, we consulted last year on 2 options. One was to continue applying the existing spatial approach that we have in the Rydale Plan, which was very much focused development at Malton and Norton, with a lesser proportion to the other market towns, and a relatively low proportion to the service villages, and then in terms of then just meeting local needs elsewhere. What we have then consulted on through the distribution and development consultation was to have effectively a more dispersed approach to development that still recognised the key sort of focus that the market towns have, but to explore the potential inclusion of additional service villages. So in terms of the recommendations, what we're consulting on is not having specific proportions attributed to settlements, because the current Rydale plan, it does that. It ascribes 50% of the housing requirement to Malton North, and we're saying that we don't want to continue with that, or indeed any of the other proportions that were attributed to certain settlements. And effectively, it's to apply that second option, whereby we would look to have some additional service villages as well in order to broaden out the housing delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions? Any questions for Rachel, members? Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's relevant when we come to the actual next point around the settlement hierarchy. proportion of the service village. So I understand, not proposing then, so the 200 amount which we mentioned on the last bullet point, one of the last bullet points, that 200 will come from the market towns as the sort of space for delivery, service village, the additional village. There isn't, in terms of the current approach, we define that as percentages, do we? Market towns, but we're not proposing to do that. Much more sort of flexible.
Yeah, the housing allocations wouldn't include the other villages. It would just be the service villages as we've potentially, hopefully expanding them, and the market towns. The yeah, in terms of not applying a proportion, yes, that would mean there would be a greater degree of flexibility about ultimately what the amounts would be. That being said, the settlement hierarchy, which we'll come on to, it still does effectively focus some degree of growth at the market towns. That being said, that's primarily we see being through, in some respects, some of the existing allocations. For example, at Norton, there is the Norton Lodge scheme. That is close to 700 houses. And that was a key allocation in the Rydale plan. And it ultimately would be an allocation that we would be looking to progress through the plan review as well. So as I hope the report tries to convey, there is a lot of work that we need to do around looking at capacity at the market towns to see what opportunities there may be for additional housing allocations. But it would certainly, as part of this plan review, ideally, hopefully as well, if it's a 5-year period, what we want to do is ensure that the land supply is as pragmatic as we can make it, really, and not commit ourselves to significant allocations which ultimately need commensurate infrastructure with them. We feel that actually that's an approach that needs to be considered by the new authority effectively.
So in terms of the concerns being raised around there still being, some people might call overdeveloped market town, actually more of a rolling approach from what we've already set ourselves on, actually developing such a way that would require significant new infrastructure around transport and those sorts of things.
I think we, in terms of the plan review, it's more around consolidation, but it's consolidation on the basis that in terms of the new local plan into the future, looking at infrastructure delivery and housing growth being a vehicle, one of a better expression, it's probably not the best analogy to use, but to help deliver better infrastructure so that the housing delivery and infrastructure delivery are better aligned going forward into the future. I think that it's highly likely that we may have to make some allocations. I think we will have to make some allocations at the market towns, but we need to do some more in-depth work to work out where they can be best accommodated. And also, in terms of those allocations, if infrastructure can be improved through their delivery, well, then that's something that would then be weighed in the sustainability balance of sites coming forward. Jill, do you want to?
I was just going to make the point that there is a reason why the current plan has the proportions in it, and that's purely because of the way the development plan was produced. It was produced as 2 documents. That was that strategic local plan strategy that set a framework for the sites document, the land allocation, which came. So we don't need the proportions anymore because we have a settlement hierarchy. What we're looking to do is identify and allocate some more land within the context of that, and it's for members to decide how you want to do that in terms of what how best to deploy, for want of a better word, those land allocations.
Thank you. Councillor Ryby?
Chair, it concerns me a little bit that you want to drop proportions because I may be wrong, but I'd like you to tell me the number of people that live in Malton and in relationship to the other market towns of Pickering, Kirby and Helmsley. You tell me, I would suggest there's probably about 10,000 people living in the other market towns. How many live in portion of 50% as it was probably is pretty kind to
I mean, I think that the Rydale plan, in terms of the way the housing was distributed, it very much focused housing delivery at Malton Norton. In the plan requirement, there was 1,800 homes, and I certainly, I mean, I may be sort of speaking. Maybe it's more for the members who are representing the communities of Malton Norton, but I think Malton Norton feel that they've had some quite significant developments take place in their settlements, and with the Norton Lodge scheme coming on stream, that is again an additional 700 houses, and close to 700 houses that are being proposed there. So it's whether or not, as Jill was saying, the way that the Rydale plan was prepared was a product of its time, because we made the allocations later on. This time round, we have our settlement hierarchy, and we can look at the allocations, and we can bring forward what we consider to be collectively as a council the most suitable and appropriate sites to bring forward for meeting the housing requirement. So that's why we are not proposing that we apply the specific thresholds, but the sites will still have a degree of synergy with the fact that we have a settlement hierarchy. So we will need to be in a degree of conformity with that, but it will be the site assessment work that we do which will establish which are the most appropriate sites to come forward based on their, I'll broadly say, the environmental context, the sort of community implications, infrastructure implications. Those will be the key things that we will be looking at.
So I didn't hear you answer the question. I suggest to you that the population of Malton are outside. You've got the railway station. You've got lots of guys out in. My feeling is that Kirby, the housing development grown very quickly, and I've got to accept the take of that. I believe in market influence. Houses. Got to accept that in Kirby the houses are big. So but I am trying to be fair, but I getting too much development. I listened to Councillor Andrews, and we're getting too much development. Yeah, maybe you are. Therefore, I say to you again, not an unfair figure isn't 50% going to more. I think it's a very fair one. Now.
I think it's a very difficult job for members to ultimately identify housing allocations. It's always a very contentious part of the planning process, and in terms of the delivery that Kirby Moorside has seen, that's primarily because there was a very substantial housing site as a planning application that actually came forward in advance of the allocations were. And what that's meant is for Kirby Moorside, it's seen relatively little housing delivery until the Westfield site, and then there's been significant housing delivery. What that will eventually do, though, is improve infrastructure at Kirby Moorside, because the fact that there will be an improved, I believe it's an extension to the primary school, and we have been in a position to release a substantial amount of money to the local education authority to improve the primary education at Kirby Moorside. I think it's fair to say that because of the fact that we will be looking at the sites, feel that the notionally ascribing a proportion of housing to settlements is not the best way to look at how you actually deliver housing sites, and it is better to look at the relative merits of those sites through a sort of considered framework, as opposed to notionally describing or ascribing a particular proportion of development to that settlement.
I think I would just add that in terms of the way the plan has worked to date, it's probably close to half the since we adopted that plan, half the housing complete. So around about 1,200 housing completions at Malton. So that is it. The plan is working in the sense that it's meeting that 50%. What we're saying is we don't necessarily have to follow that 50% as we plan for the next 5 years. I mean, that's a figure that's in comparison to about 185, 84 at Kirby Moorside. So it's a big difference. Well, there's a supply there, but in terms of completion, sorry, that's just completion.
Thank you. So, have you spoken on this one, Councillor Andrews? Right, okay, Councillor Andrews, then Councillor Clark.
No, I would just say, Chair, that I support the officers on this occasion, but I do share Councillor Ryby's concern, although my concern is for Malton and Norton, as I'm sure yours is, Chairman, as well. And like Councillor Ryby, we feel we've had enough. So therefore, when Lindsay and I started this process off, we actually said that we want the purpose. One of the purposes was to reduce the burden on the towns. Now we've looked in the working party. We looked at the request for allocation in the other villages. I think there are about 700 houses there, 700 houses or sites for 700 houses, which we looked at and we thought, well, why not? But you see what we've done. We're saying, right, we won't allocate any houses, any sites in the other villages. So we won't take the pressure off the towns that way. What we'll do is we'll have a criteria-based policy as well instead. But they said, well, if we have a criteria-based policy, we won't allocate any sites in the other villages. The result is that Councillor Ryby feels for Kirby Moorside, just like I and you, and perhaps Keane, feel about Malton and Norton. And this is the whole purpose of what I've been trying to get over to you. And whether I got over to you, I do not know. But you can see Councillor Ryby's frustration, and I think you can share my frustration, Chair. And something needs to be done to stop all this.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. I have to say that one of the developments been referred to this evening that is in Norton is going to bring significant infrastructure improvements in Norton, which will make a difference to the community as a whole, and the concerns around congestion and air quality in areas of the town. So there are pros and cons of all these discussions. I think I had you next, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm feeling might be officers in a slightly awkward position with asking them to judge percentages. I think that'd be something.
Yeah.
Do.
I think a recommendation's been made, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. Councillor Joy Andrews.
Yeah, just to go back to something Councillor Ryby said about the towns, and I think at one time Pickering was the biggest town population-wise in Rydale. It's now been overtaken, I think, by Norton, and Malton's a close second. And I think we're probably third now. But when the initial local plan was put forward, I think there was 3,000 homes plus the percentage of to be built, and Malton and Norton took 1,500, and Pickering took the 750. So in theory, 750 each. And I would just like to sort of do a shout out for Pickering to say that our the land for jobs, etc. I know we've got the thing that's pending from North Yorkshire to see whether we can get approval for jobs. But we haven't had the allocation of sites as much as Malton and Norton for development land to create jobs. So I would just say we've taken our. I know we haven't quite developed it, but Rydale's a popular place for people to want to come and live, and we've got to build these houses, and we would probably take our fair share again on that. And I know Kirkby did get a big chunk that went against the whole local plan. It was on the A170. It was outside the etc. But like you say, they have been sold, and Malton and Norton has its traffic issues, but it's on the A64. It has trains, so it is primarily where people want to start their businesses, and good for development. So I mean, I welcome the fact that we're not going to allocate to the towns as much as we did in the initial stages, and that some of the services villages will take hopefully some of that. And I think that'll probably, like Councillor Andrews said, it's good that we're not putting percentages on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan.
It's just to say that I think we may be looking at things in a slightly the wrong way in terms of talking about individual towns and the percentages that they might get, because as far as I understand it, of the 200 annual aspiration for housing delivery, that target, by adopting the option 2 or consulting on the option 2, what we're actually saying is that as of the towns overall, there may well be a lesser percentage in the towns collectively, not necessarily individual towns, but across the board, because there is perhaps greater scope for delivery in the service villages, and there's going to be more of those service villages standing as well. I'm going to cover that in the next point. So actually, I do think overall, by adopting option 2, there's certainly, I would guess, going to be less development in the market towns, whether it's Kirkby, Malton and Norton, Pickering collectively, than there would be if we continue with the option 1. So I think there may well still be some concerns that members have got about the individual areas that they represent. But I think overall, this is a more dispersed approach, would allow more development outside of the towns and otherwise would have happened. I also think we perhaps talking about development in a negative sense, and I do understand that development does create pressures, it presents change, and that's sometimes difficult to adapt to. I think it's important to understand that housing growth is really important to economic, and there are lots of people in Rydale who already live here but don't have their own property or own place where they want to live, particularly people of sort of my age generation. I think we do need to be mindful of that, to be delivering homes for everyone who wants to sort of live here, you know, people who are from here and born here and being educated here.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Frank?
I think as well as instead of having the percentage, I think you maybe ought to have a criteria, because to bear in mind that Kirkby doesn't have a centre, doesn't have a railway station anymore, and it's really poor bus service. And really, actually, Kirkby must like the service village, because it doesn't have those things there, and the towns that ought to be taking taking more housing, other services there. I think that it ought to maybe have a criteria base rather than a percentage base, is what I'm saying.
Thank you, and I think that's what Rachel has referred to, really, that there are factors
There's
that-
obviously there's the fundamental criteria of the settlement hierarchy, which does already ascribe a degree of sort of preeminence and focus towards Malton Norton, and then less so to Pickering, and then to Kirby Moorside, and then Helmsley. But the sustainability appraisal is the key vehicle for assessing the sites, and that is a really extensive examination of sites, and we ask, I think it's around 60 questions to assess the relative performance of sites against sites that are in the same settlement, and to look at you know, which are the best performing against what we term a range of sustainability objectives. And so we, in effect, we do have a criteria that we will employ to assess the sites against ready.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that's everybody in the committee's had a say. Councillor Thackeray, I know
Yes,
you're,
thank you.
yes.
Uh,
Could you,
I-
I'm sorry to have to ask again, but could you be brief, because I'm very aware of the time.
I'm not answering that. The
Well,
current,
I'm sorry,
no, sorry, the current Rydell plan is the sorry,
I was going to say, it was a perfectly reasonable, polite request.
Yeah, it's a
and I
perfectly
think
reasonable-
it deserves
it
a
is,
perfectly
absolutely.
reasonable, polite
Yeah.
response.
okay. The current Rydell plan is the illegitimate child of the Brambling Fields Junction upgrade, on which all the criteria for your current plan, your housing allocations was based. Unfortunately, the promised benefits of the scheme were never delivered, and the facts and the figures that went into the computation of the available airspace, if I might call it that, were wrong. So what I would like just to ask is that whilst we are considering the next phase of this development, that particular focus immediately is on the 700 homes and the air quality impact assessment that no doubt will accompany that development, to see whether or not during once you have a one-way system, that you are not going to exacerbate even further the dangerous air pollution in Castlegate. Thank you. I could say a lot more, obviously, but not tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Thackeray. I'm sure that will be the case when we get to that stage in the process, the planning process. Thank you for your comments. If nobody else has anything else to add, I would move the recommendation on page 62. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Joy Andrews. Lovely. Could we vote on this now? Thank you.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Moving swiftly on then, I think to our last section, apart from the two final points, Rachel, the settlement hierarchy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the settlement hierarchy, the work that we've undertaken with members has led to us considering that we should explore a re-evaluation, so to speak, of what constitutes a service village. And the current designation requires that in order to be a service village, there has to be a grocery shop. That would mean you could make a meal, a primary or secondary school, and the presence of a bus service that would allow you to access a higher order settlement, not necessarily Malton Norton, but a higher order settlement within the sort of notional standard working day, so before 9 o'clock and then be able to come home after 5 o'clock. We feel that in terms of moving forward, that type of designation is maybe no longer so relevant. It's maybe too restrictive. in light of more working from home, primarily. So we felt that it was better that we looked at the access to a bus service from a more perspective of at least having a daily bus service to access other settlements, to access services and facilities. And in doing so, then also considering whether or not settlements could have both a shop and a school, but instead considering they could have either or. And then in relation to Terrington, the fact that that has it doesn't have a daily bus service, it has a community transport, it also has a school bus, but in particular it then has the other facilities, and it also has a doctor's surgery, and that's the only village that then has a doctor's surgery that isn't already a service village. So that's the recommendation that we're making. What it would effectively mean is the number of service villages would increase by 50%. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any members have questions for Rachel? Don't know who was first. We'll go with Councillor Frank and work our way across.
They needed to have a shop, because I don't think a shopping is really relevant from Tesco's. You can get all your food and everything.
That's why we've said it's either or in relation. The key thing is that they have to have a daily bus service. That's the key criteria. Then, but Terrington is the exception to that, because it doesn't have that, but it has everything else that we might have wanted to consider as being a key facility. And then it's a case of settlements may have a shop and a school, or they may have one or the other. So it could be that in order to be a service village, they have a shop but they don't have a school, or vice versa.
Councillor Paul Andrews.
Yeah, Chair. Either primary school, secondary school, and or grocery shop. Why not or pub?
We've set out in the report why we haven't included what are nevertheless important community facilities for the purposes of social congregation, such as pubs, village halls, churches. We do acknowledge, and national planning policy acknowledges their importance, and we've recently had an appeal, a hearing about such a proposal that was ultimately going to potentially result in the loss of an acknowledged important community facility. But for the purposes of identifying where best to locate housing development, it's been determined previously through the previous local plan, and in terms of the work that we've done through the local plan working party, that it's access to services in terms of doctor surgeries, schools, education establishments, employment. Those are the sort of critical criteria that we would want to see applied in relation to delivering new housing. I'm quite certain that for the most part, yes, there will be a lot of villages do have village halls or churches or public houses. And if we were to include those, the amount of service villages that we could be potentially designating would be significantly higher. And the reason why we haven't sought to do that is because in terms of establishing a settlement hierarchy, we need to have a very clear defined framework how we do that. Because if it becomes too dispersed, we're then effectively undermining the original principles around the delivery of the spatial distribution strategy of the Rydell Plan. And the fact that when it was examined, it was concluded by the inspector that a very dispersed approach would not be appropriate, nor a very concentrated approach, nor would the delivery of, say, a new settlement either be appropriate. So in terms of the work that we consulted on back at the end of last year and the start of this year, and the work that's then moved on to create this particular service village designation approach, is to still have a degree of concentration of development, but not be as tightly defined as previous. Thank you.
You see, what I can't come back on that, Rachel. can't understand why you would be opening the floodgates. You had, if there's two requirements, actually 3 requirements, but a daily bus service, and either a primary school, secondary school, which only a few settlements do have, grocery store, which nobody has, very few places, and the pub, which a lot more people have. Now, I mean, I can't. If you have to comply with more than one criteria, and one of them is the bus service, I would have thought that it would be quite reasonable to add a public house to the second criteria. Because let's bear in mind, one of the big problems of this district is the fact that all our pubs are going out of business. We want to save them, I think. So all I would do is I would ask you to please consider adding a public house to that list. I don't know if anybody else thinks the same as me.
So Andrews, I assume this has been discussed at the working party, and members have expressed their views. Working party on the subject, and again, I come back to the point that this is a consultation. Perhaps if people feel strongly about including the local pub, or the village hall, they would express that opinion in the consultation document.
Well, Chair, I mean, we are being asked to make a decision, to make comments outside of the working party, and if that's the case, we might just as well not be here, not discussing anything. So I mean, I do think it's a valid point, and I do think it needs to be discussed. And the local plan is important because it's going to carry up. It's going to last for another 9 years until 2032. So please, Chair, bear with us and let's discuss all the aspects of this. I can't expect members around this table to sort of look at us and say, well, you are the working party, you know what's best. It's got to be much more wide ranging than that, and people who are outside the working party have got to have the opportunity to have their own views.
I wasn't saying that members of this committee shouldn't have their own views, but I'm just saying I assume that it has been discussed at the working party. Rachel, do you want to respond to the question about pubs and village?
Well, in relation to if there was an approach where we included pubs, it may well then be seen by those who are interested in delivering housing within what could then come forward as service villages. They may then argue, well, why are you not including village halls? Why are you not including churches? Because ultimately they're all places of congregation, and the villages that in terms of a service village designation, the facilities that we're looking at are those that would effectively allow access to employment, to education, the provision of, for example, making a meal, and those kind of sort of key life facilities. That's not to say that delivery, in terms of having local facilities for communities to congregate in is not important. It is. And I certainly think that in relation to the fact that we are looking at expanding the service village designation by 50%, which means instead of having 10 village groupings, we would have 15. And also in terms of in relation to the fact that we are exploring a criteria-based policy that will be delivering small-scale sites at the other villages, they in themselves could then facilitate and support those existing community congregation facilities that are there.
Thank you, Rachel.
That's the question, Chair. If a grocery store, why not a pub?
Thank you. Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Chair. Norton and Beedham disputed for years that they're not a service village, and they still dispute they're not a service village. We have 2 schools and we have a pub and a very, very irregular bus service. We don't have a doctors, and quite often these days, if a pensioner wants to have market, he's got to wait 4 hours to get a bus back, maybe even longer than that. And if you want to get to Pickering on the bus from Helmsley, work for 8 o'clock, you can't. I don't call that a bus to get people to work. And as far as Councillor Andrews says that no.
Councillor Duncan?
have a question, but I just want to make some comments. I don't know if now's the best time or to wait.
No, I think now is the best time.
I think we all seem to have issues with the actual definition of a service village, and I do think this is the part of the proposed way forward that I think I have most concerns around, and I think questions around as well, listening to what other members say. I think if you look at the villages that have been defined and you look at, I think, the approach which was outlined before, and I'm corrected if any correct, but I think from a sustainability point of view, the original, when we originally drew together the latest Rydale plan, which before I joined the council, the approach that you would concentrate development in the market towns where they had the facilities that people needed to travel long distances to go to school, to go to a shop, access transport, etc. That was part of, I think, the key foundation of the plan. Then you would have service villages where, again, there would have to be limited movement around to the market towns because they had a school, because they did have access to public transport, because they had access to a shop. That was sort of the rationale behind having a definition and having that sort of 3 tiers of approach: the market towns, the service villages, obviously the other villages occupancy clause. And I can see the rationale behind that in terms of, climate point, etc. I can understand that. But I do think that if you look at what the policy means in reality, and you look at the definition, are we saying, for example, and one of the Setterington, are we saying that people in Setterington are any less likely to need to travel outside of Setterington than people in, let's say, Scagglethorpe, right next door? It's obvious that people in both of those communities will probably still have the similar likelihood of having to go to a market town, the nearest one being Bolton and Norton. You look at Ruddington again as an example. They may well have a daily bus service, they may well have a school, but actually are those people any less or more likely to have to travel into towns than other villages nearby? So I'm actually quite reluctant that we do define a service village category of development, because I actually think that by doing that, I think it becomes quite illogical. I'm not going to propose to do that, but I do think that potentially it's something we should look at. Whether we can do that before and with this very time limited review, or I'm not sure of. Actually, I would much rather see sort of a category of development based on population size, necessarily based the actual facilities that they have. I think it's also worth pointing out that the definitions at the moment, secondary school, a lot of these villages future, again with bus services, and I say this as the person responsible for bus services in the county, that they may well have a service right now, but looking into next year, they may have that service. So I think, given that this is a movable feast, I think it's sort of a bit of a illogical approach to actually define where development can happen, because that could mean somewhere very similar next door, in fact, which has the same propensity of people to move around into the village to get the necessities into the market towns, necessities that they need. I just think it's potentially needs to be looked at. So I just wanted to raise that as a concern, although I will support us consulting on the basis that's been out.
Thank you. Any further comments, thoughts? Not, we will move the recommendations which are on page 66. I move those from the chair. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Joy Andrews. We vote now.
Seven for and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. So, sorry. So finally on this item, and thank you members very much for all your attention to this, because it is such an important piece of work that the officers have spent a huge amount of time on, and the working party. And I'd like to add my thanks to the working party for all the work they've done. But there are still two points on the recommendations, which are 8 and 9, to be voted on.